only just started.
It's important we begin this review with some disclosure. I have been given a free review code of the game by Cleral of Cleral Calamity Studios, the developers of the game, and they offer to be friends on Steam for faster communication as opposed to email, in case I'm in trouble with bugs, glitches, feedback, and just to generally shoot the shit. And I hadn't added them to my friends list before receiving the review code for this game. I have to disclose this in the video because if you're watching this on Twitter, Facebook, or anywhere else, you won't be able to see the disclosure in the description box, and that I like to be transparent with my viewers and let you guys know exactly what's going on behind the scenes with the reviews. So if you're perfectly okay watching a review from someone who has received the game for free, please feel free to watch on. If not, I do recommend you check out other critics on YouTube if there are any covering the game, and you can also check out the Steam reviews. That all said, this is Haven. If there's two things I'm sick of seeing on Steam, it's indie horror games and indie RPG maker games. Well, no, there's more actually. I'm also sick of time wasters on greenlight survival games and early access that offer free DLC to delay the final release, which isn't going to happen anyway, and games that simply don't work. Like seriously, why won't my mouse sync up properly in my ex-boyfriend the Space Tyrant? Oh great, now I've just ruined my fantastic opening to the gameplay. Bollocks! If there's two things I'm sick of seeing on Steam, it's indie horror games and indie RPG maker games. So imagine my surprise when someone had the idea to combine the two and make a sodding good game out of it. It seems there's only Cleral and Yahtzee Croshaw left making decent games like this. Well, Yahtzee made his in AGS for the most part. Shit, I've done it again!
Only because you glued up the letterbox.
You play as Cleral, projecting himself quite a bit in this game as Cleral. In a way. See, you're in the funny farm because you're radio rental and the only way you find peace in this dark, miserable cell is by going to your haven. It's where you meditate, and you meditate for so long that you only see black when you're not in haven. Might just be that they turn out the lights to save electricity. I mean, might as well if all you're going to do is rest your eyes, really. Now here's where things go from ho-hum up your bum indie asylum antics to really super complicated that a dum-dum like me got confused. You're playing as one of the few conscious parts of Cleral's mind, a personification of his mental self. In Haven he's a poet and a cynic, living in a beautiful forest on a floating island. Near his haven are his alter egos, the avatars of his other needs and desires. The jester is a fat happy clown that talks about masturbation and his arse a lot. Then there's the bookkeeper who represents the logical and analytical side of your character's mind. And finally there's the stranger who... I don't really know what he does, something to do with being a reflection. I didn't like him much until the end anyway. All's well until there's a badness going on. The subconscious is trying to take over the conscious, meaning, I think, that Haven will be lost and shaped into whatever the subconscious wants it to be. See, Cleral's in control of his mind in Haven, but that changes when Ego and his minions decide to take over the brain. You'll navigate the mental patient's mind in a linear fashion, beating puzzles and defeating enemies in random battles before you face off with each boss of that zone. The zones and their enemies make sense too. For the most part, the bosses don't just feel like big enemies, the game makes sure that when you beat one you know what effect it has on the body and the mind. By defeating the crystallizer, you're destroying your memories, making it harder for the subconscious to return and restore its minions. But that also applies to you. By destroying Nervos, you put yourself into a self-induced coma to halt subconscious own war effort. By obliterating id, you're removing the violent instincts of the ego. It's all riveting stuff. Before you get to them though, you'll need to do some leveling, but the game's merciful with its random encounters, not to mention there's no need to grind. But it doesn't hurt to churn out a handful of levels. From what I understand, the level cap is 13 and the game's short enough for you to be just below that in a standard playthrough. You'll fight mostly against Inklings, fragments of your mind turned against Cleral and have no thoughts of their own, and while there's little enemy variation, battles get repetitive and their patterns are predictable after the first fight with them, it's the player who has the means to spice things up and is required to change their strategies to beat the opponents, as opposed to using the same attacks and spells. Although Cleral's sanity and ink can be called HP and mana respectively, the way he uses them is honestly what I needed to get back into RPG Maker games. For the longest time I've been used to games where I can easily stock up on potions, revive items and super duper spells, and that's not really the case in Haven. Clarel uses both his health and mana to cast spells, and enemies will often drain one resource but give him another. It creates a game of tug of war, not just with yourself but with your enemies, choosing whether or not you want to do less damage to get more ink, or if you really need a heal at the cost of your best magic resource. Clarel can still attack, but I only used it when silenced, but his companions have decent attacks, when they aren't too busy sapping their own health and magic, that is. The Jester has no mana pool, so he has to dip into his own health to debuff enemies and do area of effect damage, but in return he can heal and get lots out of his defense stat when he levels up. The Bookkeeper can bookmark a point in time and return to it, restoring the character's status effects to what they were when the spell was cast. You can also do high damage with one of his abilities, but it costs a ton of ink, and he has to sap it from Clarel if he wants to do it again. And based on my few experiences with the Stranger, he can do more damage depending on how much sanity he has, swap his sanity and ink values, as well as mimic another alter ego if he's not quite suited for the current situation. He's still my least favourite, but I appreciate his uses. Another cool thing about the alter egos is that you can bring them up to the same level as Clarel by pressing the S key, which will save you from babysitting them in early zones to catch up. Not that you'll need to. As said earlier, the need to grind is almost entirely gone thanks to the length of the game and superb balance. There's not much need to explore the zones except for inkwells, the only currency in Clarel's mind. Inkwells can be used at the dictionary, a soothing place to learn new skills in the form of big words. It's like being the Dragonborn, but better. Being completely hand-drawn and, by the looks of it, painted in some places, Haven has a charm that few other indie games have. I'm reminded of the artsy Crowshaw's games in Adventure Game Studio, where assets are created and animated by the developer, and not just bought from Unity without any editing whatsoever. In terms of graphical fidelity, it's not great, and from a single person I expect much more. I believe Dust and Elysian Tale to be the exception, not the rule. However, I appreciate the work that went into each of the zones and bosses, particularly that of the monster boss, which represents self-cannibalization.
Lovely.
I would have liked to see more in terms of idle animations, even if it's just characters bobbing up and down on the spot. It seems only Clarel and the alter egos move out of combat, with everyone else frozen stiff. It's a shame that the attacks don't really connect either, with friend and foe alike casting spells into the ether and having them materialise to strike the other down. The sound design is okay. The sound effects mostly consist of spells hitting with a flat crunch, which reminds me of 16-bit RPGs, so I guess that's something to say about them. The music, on the other hand, took an unfortunate turn during development. Just days before release, there'd been issues with licensing and it had to be replaced with royalty-free music. The music here lends a fitting atmosphere to each of the zones though, and it's not all from Kevin MacLeod, so it's got that going for it. It's time to give you my final thoughts before I slip into something more comfortable. Like a coma. There's not much left to say about Haven, nor is there much for someone with the intellect of a smashed badger to ponder on. For you smart people, Haven should provide some thought-provoking, if admittedly cringy, edgelord-esque dialogue as the script goes out of its way to delve into psychology and philosophy, but did nothing for the cymbal-clashing monkey in my noggin. As an RPG, though, it's bloody good fun and doesn't outstay its welcome. The game promises between 4 and 5 hours of play, and if you manage to break the game as many times as I did and have to reload saves, that's about accurate. However, if you're luckier than I am, and luck seems to determine if you won't appear in the walls when you go into the next room, then it should last about 2.5 hours. There is something I'd like to address though. Despite what the store page tells you, the game does in fact hold your hand informing you of upcoming challenging fights, even when it's obvious, and it recommends you save before them. It's a shame that features like pressing F1 to open up a settings menu weren't explained, but pressing S to bring my characters up to speed had numerous reminders. For £3.99 it's a decent price, and if I do decide to replay it, which is likely, it'd definitely be worth its asking price the second time round. Then again, I got the game for free, so I can't really comment on the price. But why wouldn't you get this? It's got a clown whose minions talk about how round his arse is! Until the next time, I'm Johnbonne, number 1 source for number 2 games. Now, excuse me, I'm going to be watching some intellectually challenging content. Ta-ta for now.